say.
Thank you very much, and my apologies for being late. It was mostly the Bombay traffic, and I really apologize. So thank you for your patience, everyone. And to the panelists, thank you, Rail, Mohan, Navdeep, and Matthias, thank you for being on. We're really thrilled to have this, to be at this session today. A quick word on Gateway House. We are a foreign policy think tank based in Mumbai. We are the first of its kind in the city and perhaps in the country as well. We are not for profit. We are non-partisan. We're independent. And we're independent of government. We're independent of foreign agencies. And we hope that this gives us the credibility to be on platforms like this. So we appreciate it. We also have a social media department. My team is here, actually. And I think we're probably the only think tank that is extremely active on social media. So we embrace the technology and appreciate it. All our panelists are people who, Mohan Pai is a founder member of Gateway House. So you can see he encourages us a great deal. Anand Mahindra is the second. So we have the two pioneers of social media in Indian business who are our supporters. I'll go right into digital diplomacy. So traditionally, foreign policy has been the exclusive domain of bureaucrats and diplomats. Social media has now brought foreign policy discussions into the public domain. I think the days when the diplomats wore bow ties and dinner jackets and went out to parties has changed. They've now had to roll up their sleeves and become development wallahs as well. Now, diplomacy is also no longer the domain of merely drawing room talk between ambassador to ambassador. It is now open to the public domain. And so diplomats have had to do a great deal of adjusting over the past few years. I will just move right into the questions to save time. Sorry. We know we have Mohan, who is...
yes, I'm here.
Mohan
Yes.
Pai. I'm going to start with you, Mohan. You are a business leader active on social media. Business leads uses social media to push the narrative of companies and business. How does this compare with diplomats with their countries and issues?
Well, I think diplomats need to talk to their constituencies and to people around the world instantaneously about events that happen before the rest of the media comes up and tries to give it a twist. They need to get their views across. And if you look at all the great political leaders, they've got maybe hundreds of thousands of followers, and these followers talk to them, retweet, and reach a very large audience. Also, it gives you an instant access to many hundreds of thousands of people around the world and puts your view right up there before some other commentator comes and gives a twist. But this is one way through social media to directly link up with your constituencies. You need to be careful because on social media you may get abused. There'll be many malcontents who are going to come and tweet whatever they want and write all kind of stuff. But it's a great way to reach, and I think you've got to be there. Whether the best way to reach. And today in a democracy, when you have to get your views across, you've got to be there. And in international diplomacy, when you want to get your views across, you've got to be there. And your social media tweets and your Facebook is being followed by international media because it is a very instant way of logging in wherever you are in a very asynchronous manner, 24/7.
Thank you, Mohan. And we'll move on to two other pioneers. Let's start with Matthias, who can explain to us. He wrote a wonderful essay called Twitlomacy. Thank you, Matthias. So digital diplomacy, what does it mean?
Well, our Twitlomacy study, Twitlomacy is basically the contraction of Twitter and diplomacy, is looking at the Twitter accounts of heads of state and government and foreign ministers, the personal accounts and the institutional accounts. And this year we identified 650 Twitter accounts. And what we're looking at is not the number of followers, who's on top and who has the most followers. We know it is Barack Obama, followed very closely actually by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who has become the third most followed world leader after Pope Francis. But what we're looking at is not so. It's not the number of followers which is important, but the connections between them. So who is following who? And I find this is really interesting because you can see on Twitter who is interacting with who is following who, and it actually allows you to have some private diplomacy on the channel. I don't know how many world leaders actually do send direct messages. I know from a fact from our diplomacy Twitter account that when we send direct messages, we do get responses, feedback, and response rates of 25%, if not more.
Thank you, Matthias. And to Ambassador Navdeep Suri, who began it all for India. So Navdeep, you began India's public diplomacy department, and you really began India's engagement with social media. Tell us a little bit about your journey and what it's really meant for India.
Well, initially, the reactions that we got were really positive because suddenly people started saying, "Oh my God, the Ministry of External Affairs is on how cool that."
Yes.
And then we discovered after sort of the that subsided, and this was back in July 2010 when we became the first Government of India departments to formally, under our own handle, go on Twitter under the handle @IndianDiplomacy. Then we started getting a barrage of complaints on passport issues, on visa issues, and so on. And we suddenly realized this new dimension that we had to handle. So we asked the head of our passport and visa, the additional secretary in charge, can you please go on Twitter, because it's important that you and your department handle these queries, otherwise we'll be completely deluged under these. And so I think for us in the Ministry of External Affairs, in those early days in July 2010, there's a lot of learning on the job that we went through with. But quickly, where we moved to, at least in the public diplomacy division, was to recognize that, as Mohandas was saying, that it is such a powerful channel or tool available to you to create a narrative about India's soft power. And so within 3 months, from July to September 2010, we were on YouTube. We started digitizing all our films, all our documentaries. We started an Indian Diplomacy Facebook page. We started a Facebook page for all the iTech alumni, people who we fund, whose training we fund, so that they can get together and start exchanging information with each other. So for us, as a platform for Indian soft power, public diplomacy really started using the social media, and it's been a very, very rewarding journey. And since I have left, my successes have taken it a long way since then.
And you are now India's ambassador to Egypt at a time of great turmoil. Are you using the social media to explain to people, Egyptians, India's position, and to explain to India Egypt's position?
Well, two things, Manjeet. Firstly, let's take our Facebook page. We have 77,000 mostly young Egyptians who like our page. So that gives us a very significant outreach into young Egyptians and in terms of communicating our views, but interacting with them. We use it a lot for cultural stuff. We use it a lot for our business stuff. We used it to talk about the Mars orbiter mission, for example. It's very useful. Twitter, we use differently. And I think, in a sensitive situation, in a sensitive diplomatic assignment, there's a value, and there are also inherent limitations on what you can say and how you will say it on Twitter. To me personally, while I use Twitter to communicate stuff that we do at the embassy and create a texture to the life of a diplomat, and it's not all about, as you said, bow ties and cocktails and so on, but there's real solid work that goes on. But it's also an immensely useful source of information for us. By following the right people, the top journalists or the top leaders or others, the bloggers and so on, we find that it's real-time information. If there's a protest happening next to Tahrir Square, you can bet that there's a senior journalist out there covering it. And I, sitting in my office, I'm getting real-time information about what's going on over there. And I can issue an advisory to the members of the Indian community that, look, today this is stuff happening in this area, so please be careful. So there are real uses for us.
Right. Thank you. And Rail, you have you're really in the engine of the social media. There are negative uses also to social media. For instance, the group ISIS has been using social media, has become notorious for the use of Twitter and YouTube to disseminate its propaganda. How can diplomats work to counter that? What kind of strategy do you think they should use?
The ability that diplomats have now of communicating in real time, live, on a medium that's public and conversational is incredible. As Mr. Suri said, that when they started on Twitter, I'm very sure they didn't think that the medium would lend itself to what they were doing as powerfully as it has. And now you see the Indian diplomacy handle, you see the Prime Minister's personal handle, then you also see the PMO India office handle, and the MEA India handle. So these are 4 handles, and the handle of the External Affairs Minister, Sushma Swaraj. You see these 5 handles literally put out the point of view that India has on every issue that's relevant internationally in real time. That ability is unrivaled. Because
does that counter the propaganda?
Of course it does, because the moment someone puts out something, you can correct them in real time. You can put out your point of view in real time. What Mr. Suri was saying, that certainly you have the ability of amplifying, putting out your point of view to an audience that cares about what you're doing, an audience that needs to know what you're doing. So if you saw the latest trip, the Japan trip of the Prime Minister, in which he tweeted in Japanese, right. It's unprecedented. You have the Prime Minister of a country reaching out to the public of another country in their own language. Right. And social, and more importantly, I feel our platform, and I don't say this because I work at Twitter, I say this because we are a public live conversational platform, makes that conversation possible.
Right. Mohan, back to you. Social media often results in information overload. This is evident every day, and you yourself use various formats of information to keep up to date. How can business leaders like yourself practice digital diplomacy or digital communication? How does this help to mitigate the problem, or how do you manage it?
Well, I'm an individual now, so I manage it on my own. I don't have a team of people. But most people will have their executive assistants, others helping them. So they respond to immediate tweets. They only see what they want to see because they could get overwhelmed. And one rule of social media is you tweet to reach out to others, but don't respond to others, because you get an enormous amount of response. Don't get you into argument with anybody. See it as a means of reaching out and communicating with people you want to communicate out of the general world, but never get into an argument. And that makes life easy. Maybe read what others send it to you, but keep quiet. And try to reach out to some leaders privately because it gives a direct connection. Please remember, the power of diplomats over the country's leaders was because they could isolate information that went to the leaders. The power of the bureaucrat was that he could isolate information to himself and keep it to himself or herself, so the leaders were kept away from the people. Right. Now a president of a country reaches out to all the citizens directly. He could get responses, good or bad, and all over the world leaders are doing that. So you know what Premier Abe is doing, you know what President Obama is doing, and how they want to reach. So the power that the bureaucrats had and the diplomats had to keep things to themselves and sanitize what was done is totally gone. So I think that's a very important thing for leaders. So for me, I love people responding to me. I will not respond to them. Sometimes I argue with them, but I will read what I want to read, and what I want to tweet, I tweet. For me, is a means of reaching out to many other people, period.
Okay, so Navdeep.
Democratization of information and reach. The whole world is getting connected. Just imagine the power that Obama can talk to 6 million people all over the world, tell them what the US policy is, what he wants to do. Modi can do it. I mean, it's beautiful.
So Navdeep, if a leader wants to communicate and have a conversation with somebody, you don't recommend it either? How do you manage the information overload?
Well, I think starting from your original question about information overload, I am very choosy about who I follow. And there's a meaning or a purpose behind the people I follow, so that I am able to get the information that I am seeking. And as I said, for me, Twitter is not just to put my word out, but it's also a very, very useful source of information. And I think many people underappreciate that. I get access to bloggers and journalists and so on via this medium. The second thing which Mohandas is saying is the paradigm shift for us was in Ministry of External Affairs was that can we move from the need to know mindset to the need to share mindset, where you proactively communicate what you are about, and this was a jump. It wasn't easy in the initial stages to persuade and to say that we're out. The first fear was you are exposing yourself to the public, and this is going to be fraught with. It's going to be fraught with consequences. And I think once you choose to go out there, perhaps Mohandas as an individual has the prerogative of not responding, but government, I think we felt that anything substantive, we should respond. We got more than our fair share of trolls and of abuse and so on, but we tried as far as possible to follow the principle, ignore but don't block. Okay. And we, yeah, so if somebody's being if somebody's being completely abusive, all right, I'll ignore you. But even then, I wanted to be aware that there are these voices out there who maybe disagree profoundly with what we want to say or what we are doing.
And I'm sure they're going to tweet about it. So Matthias, your study talks about how the African leaders are the most engaged with their audience. They actually have a conversation back and forth individually.
Exactly, and this is what I wanted to stress. Mohandas said, he's using Twitter more to broadcast, and I think, lots of people use Twitter, lots of governments use Twitter just to broadcast, just like a radio. And Ambassador Navdeep said that, he's also using Twitter to monitor. But what I think it is essential, and Rahil said it, Twitter is a conversation tool, allows you to have a conversation. And in our study, we found that actually African leaders use Twitter mainly to reply to their followers. So basically, they sit down for half an hour or more and just reply to their followers, exchanging niceties, exchanging greetings, discussing issues. Of course, they are not obliged to answer every single question that is put to them. But to give you an example, the former now Prime Minister of Uganda, 96% of his tweets were @ replies. Any tweet that starts with the @ symbol is not seen by every one of your followers. So really conversational use. Also, the president of Rwanda uses Twitter really to address his critics very, very openly. And I think this is what really leaders should do. They should sit down every now and then for short Twitter interviews. Like they were doing press conferences before. Now they can just sit down for half an hour, answer any question that comes in on Twitter. And the beauty of Twitter is that you can actually, it has several advantages over these, over traditional press conferences, because you can see the question in writing, giving you precious time to answer, to prepare your answer. Just half an hour ago, the Austrian foreign minister was in New York sitting down for a Twitter chat with his followers. So I think it's a great tool, and people shouldn't be afraid of the trolls or getting abused. You know, you can simply ignore them.
Thank you. Ryle, a quick question on the great benefits. If he's talking about the benefits of social media, you were extremely active on Twitter, helping to coordinate relief efforts during the recent flood outbreak in Kashmir. What was the impact of using Twitter to coordinate relief efforts? And are there existing models that can be implemented by diplomatic missions around the world?
You know, just adding to what Matthias and the ambassador said there, first of all, the fact that, we can't stress this enough, that the platform is live, public, and conversational, and it's mobile, where most of your global audience is going. Everyone is consuming their content on cell phones. And we're optimized for that, right? The ability that gives, the ability to communicate in real time is, as I said, precious. And that's what we harvested when we were coordinating relief and data for the J&K flood relief issue. We've seen, we're a large country, and sometimes there's a flood somewhere, and at the same time, there's an issue of there being no water in other parts of the country. There's a drought somewhere. In this case, what we wanted to do was that we needed to come together as a group that was led by a purely citizen-driven, volunteer-led effort, and make sure that we give everyone else who wanted to contribute in some way or the other to relief or rehabilitation or even data, as far as this issue was concerned, give them that opportunity. Organize information around the issue. There's this, whenever something happens, there's thousands of tweets that go out per minute. Our effort was to make sure that people who were looking at that information as first responders were only looking at information that was relevant to them.
Right.
Because you could basically, if you're using the hashtag Kashmir floods, you could also be expressing shock, but that's not useful to the army.
That's right.
That's looking at that hashtag, identifying SOS messages, right? So also in terms of relief, what we were able to do is purely through Twitter, we were able to coordinate relief from about 35 centers across the country that came up once we had Indigo on board as a partner for shipping. We had volunteers approach us, and it was deeply moving to notice that once we put our email ID out there, we had really random people get in touch with us saying, hey, I am a small manufacturer of bed sheets in X part of the country. Could you tell me how many I could send so I could basically ship these to the affected parts?
Yeah, so in some sense, it really brings out the humanity of people in a more immediate way.
Absolutely.
Than otherwise. Navdeep, I think the Indian mission has done very well on relief efforts using Twitter. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about how we coordinated in Libya to help our people? I'm sure the audience would want to hear this. Navdeep? Oh, I think Navdeep has gone off the air. We'll move on, but the Indian mission in Libya, actually the ambassador there was very quick, used Twitter to communicate, Twitter and Facebook to communicate with the Indians who were stranded and working in different parts of Libya, and managed to evacuate every single one of them using social media. Yeah, no, it was quite a triumph.
No, if I can throw some more light on what we did using Twitter, is that we deployed a smart feed, which is a model that we are looking to replicate elsewhere as well, as like on a need basis, so that messages, so if you're looking at about 45 to 50 or 50 to 80 tweets per minute, and you have to realize that it's in the army control room, it's actual officers looking at a screen, which is scrolling at an incredible speed. Yes, what we were able to do is we were able to basically make sure, yeah, that there's an isolation of what was going on in real time on Twitter to what they needed to see. Making those two connections was very, very important.
This is the great power of technology. Mohan, back to you. A quick question. Social media networks are challenging existing hierarchies within diplomacy, within business. Will a future digital business model create a changed corporation, a changed enterprise? How is that? How do you see that playing out, Mohan?
Well, today I think there is instant reach for every individual with some other individual without going through an intermediary. That's a tremendous development. And it is one-on-one, it's instantaneous, it is very public, that is transparent, and you get instant feedback. So I think that is changing the business model. When you deal with clients, for instance, if the service is not good, they send a tweet to you directly to the CEO and say, you know, man, it sucks. And you get the feedback. Your marketing fellow is going to say, everything is great, don't worry about it, and you'll never get the feedback. It may not come in the newspaper, it may not come anywhere, but you get it. For example, when I had a problem with one telecom provider, I tweeted, and I got a response in 30 minutes. We're coming to you, hang on, we want to solve your problem. Now I know if I'd called them up or sent something, there would be nothing. And within the enterprise too, if you have 100,000 employees and somebody down the line says, you know, this policy is not good, this is what is happening. So, you know, the whole flow of information, the outreach between individuals and leadership, the leadership ability to communicate, get information, and to have, well, let's say, a one-on-one dialogue is changing the entire context. It probably make organization more flatter in terms of information flows, may not be in terms of hierarchy for discipline or whatever it is, in terms of instant information flows, faster decision making, a quicker response to what is happening in the marketplace and within the enterprise, and overall change the entire dynamics, bring in greater transparency. It also means you can't keep things confidential within the enterprise. Now, please remember, there were many things that will go wrong, and you try to keep it confidential. You don't want the news to go out. Now you've got a medium by which, you know, things could leak out. You're on air 24/7 in business, in diplomacy, and everywhere else, and that's a very significant development.
And maybe I should ask Matthias, since Navdeep seems to have gone off the air. Matthias, will we ever see, you know, virtual embassies?
Well, there are already virtual embassies. There is the Canadian government has set up a mission for Iran, and also the US government is reaching out to Iranians using social media, using Facebook and Twitter. So it's already happening. There are some countries which are far ahead in terms of empowering. Not only Rahil talked about the four main government accounts, but every single echelon of government, putting every single mission out on social media, on Twitter and Facebook, but also the ambassadors personally, and then of course all the deputy heads of missions, etc., all the diplomats. So the UK government, I think, is leading in that field and really empowering every single diplomat to be out there, to be active. But I would say one thing: I mean, yes, it's true. It is very difficult to keep things private, but I think diplomats will still know what to tweet and when to tweet it. So don't expect a diplomat to go into a private meeting and then tweet information from the meeting unless he wants to scupper the outcome. So if you remember the Geneva talks here in Geneva about the Iran nuclear deal, if I remember well, they basically decided a social media blackout. So basically during the negotiations, no tweet was sent from either side, from the five Western powers or the Iranian representatives, just to keep those conversations inside the rooms private. And I think that's the new reality now. You have to make it very clear, if you want to have a private conversation, please don't tweet about it, don't Facebook about it, don't Snapchat about it.
Right. And so we're not going to see any virtual summits soon at all.
Well, this is, what are we having here? We're having a virtual conversation.
We are.
Three panelists are all over the world, and you're in Mumbai.
Absolutely. If I could just reference the conversation post the Japan summit that happened between Prime Minister Abe and Prime Minister Modi, when Prime Minister Abe wished him on Twitter on his birthday. So they had a public conversation which was, it's usually these conversations used to happen behind closed doors. No one knew what was said, what was spoken of. And now everyone has the ability to not just consume those conversations, but also to participate in them.
That's right. My last question, and I'm going to have all three of you talk to it. How are international organizations like the United Nations using Twitter? Do their specialized agencies use it to achieve some of their goals and missions? And Mohan, I will ask the same question of you with your NGOs that you work with, Akshay Patra, for instance, and also Matthias, I'll come back to you. So,
I mean, it's the same use case, right? The platform being live, public, and conversational, and mobile. You certainly have an ability to reach out to an audience that's consuming content on their cell phones globally. And if you reconcile what you're doing on your, as a strategy, what you're doing on Twitter with how the mobile market is growing in the world, what you have then is an ability to reach out to thousands and thousands and millions of users in real time as they consume content on their cell phones, right? So with respect to the UN, with respect to the World Health Organization, with respect to the ICRC, with respect to Save the Children, with respect to Oxfam, organizations, again, we've worked with in J&K floods, they've all put in real time what is it that they're doing as a response. In fact, if you look at UN, it has multiple accounts, and every now and then you'll see some activation or the other being pioneered. You'll have, say, for example, Kajol just came on board onto Twitter talking about child abuse, right. And that's an ability that the platform, yes, transfers to a star even as powerful as Kajol.
That's right. Mohan, do you use Twitter and social media to engage with your NGO Akshay Patra, and do they use it?
Yeah, Akshay Patra uses it to reach out to people because they need to talk to the donors, they need to talk to the recipients, get feedback. It's a fantastic tool to get feedback from children. And some of them do tweet about whether the food is good, what has happened today, and it's very interesting. They hired a professional agency to help them out because they were new, and many people are not comfortable with technology, and they need to learn how to tweet, what to do, and sometimes you have to use a short form. So I think many people use a professional agency to talk to them and tell them, and especially political leaders, I think sometimes get some people to do things for them. I know 2 or 3 political leaders in India who tweet every day, and they have one young person next to them who will write it down and make sure it's all right, show it to them. Because what is important is that it's instantaneous. So whatever you tweet goes out, and you've got to make sure that it reads well and it is okay and it is not something that people may misinterpret. Yes, NGOs do that, and I think it's great.
So Matthias, what are the drawbacks of social media today?
I don't see any drawback. I think the drawback is not to be present, to be very frank with you. You have to be, of course, as politicians, you have to be a bit thick-skinned to deal with the trolls and probably the negative tweets and abuse that sometimes comes in. But coming back to the international organizations, we actually looked at 100 top international organizations because Geneva is the European seat of the United Nations, and it's really interesting to see the different use cases. So you have the WHO, the World Health Organization. They have only one Twitter account, which is kind of their official voice, but then you have an organization like the UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, where basically the head of communications has empowered every single member of staff to go out and use social media to tell the story in the field. And they even have one of the refugee camps on Twitter. So the refugee camp is tweeting what's happening in the refugee camp. There's the Zaatari camp, which is the second biggest city in Jordan. So there's really different ways to use it. But one thing is clear, that those organizations that put in resources, especially staff, are really thriving on Twitter, because one person alone cannot do it, and you can't just do it on the side of your regular work.
That's right. So we'll open this up to the audience. Does anyone have questions? I have a list of questions actually from the audience. So perhaps I can just run through them a little bit. If anyone has a has a separate question, just put up your hand and let me know. There are countries, maybe I should start with you. There are countries which are not on the mainstream social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. So Pakistan has banned YouTube. China has banned all three. Turkey banned Twitter during the protests earlier this year. How are these countries affected by their disconnect from social media? And what is the impact of banning such mainstream platforms instead using countrywide platforms?
I think in all of these countries, the users themselves are finding innovative and creative ways of getting past these bans. Turkey, I know for sure, there were pictures out that people printed tweets out and put them on the streets. It was an extremely powerful visual for us to see. With Pakistan, as well as, say, China, for example, they have their own ecosystem happening, and I would want to go commenting there. But Pakistan specifically, they also, the users themselves have found ways and means, their proxies in use and so on and so forth. Like, I have a lot of friends in that country working in similar environments. And I know for a fact that the users find workarounds. You see, the beauty of the internet and social platforms per se is that the harder you try to control them, the harder they are to control.
So it's like water, it just seeps out from
Absolutely.
any crevice you can find.
Yeah.
Mohan, question to you. How, aside from increasing interaction between diplomats and countries, how can social media further facilitate interaction between business and diplomacy?
Well, I think you should be knowing that in some countries, diplomats don't take it easily to the private sector, talking to them about how diplomacy should be run. You find that diplomats are a class apart. They think they're the epitome of all intelligence and knowledge in that particular country. They have a monopoly of diplomacy, etc. And they don't want feedback. They don't want to listen to new ideas. And I think when business is increasingly driving diplomacy and relationship between countries, it's important for business to make the point known. And today, if diplomats try to ignore business and keep them away or bear a very perfunctory approach to business, they're going to be mistaken because business will reach out directly to political leaders. For example, today you can send a tweet to your prime minister and tell him when he goes to New York, this is what business expects from your visitor. This is what we want you to look up. And citizens can send it too, right? So I think it's making it very transparent and very, let's say, direct. And that's a great news.
Okay. And Matthias, last question to you. Can digital diplomacy lead to more of world peace?
That's a good question. Well, we'll hope so. What is really interesting to see, who is connected with who. If you see that the Israeli Prime Minister, for example, is following the Palestinian government, that's a sign of rapprochement. But unfortunately, the Palestinian government does not follow the Israeli Prime Minister.
Does not return the compliment.
So no, don't return it. The other thing is, you mentioned Narendra Modi's Twitter diplomacy. It's very interesting also in which order, remember when he was elected, in which order he thanked the world leaders and who he did not thank. So it's really interesting, how you can basically who's creating alliances with who. One great example are all Latin American leaders. They're really tweeting in a vacuum, only in their on their continent, only in Spanish, and don't really reach out to English-speaking and other English-speaking countries around the world. So it's great to see this, but I hope Twitter and Facebook will really help that we're more connected, that we can be ask a question here from Geneva to the Prime Minister in India and so on. He might not read the tweet personally, but his team will certainly monitor those questions.
Well, maybe our BRICS grouping can start incubating some interesting social media ideas. Maybe, Rasil, you folks should try and initiate some of that.
We're working at it.
So just to wrap up the session, because we're at the end of time. Yes, social media can lead to world peace. Yes, Matthias? And that Mohan says that business can now approach political leaders directly without having to go through their diplomats. And so everyone's on notice, in short. with social media. And lastly, the interesting thing, Mohan says he sends out tweets and gets responses, but he doesn't respond back.
I respond back to few people. I have a running argument with a few people every day, not everybody.
You choose it, okay.
Oh, yeah, I choose it. And let me tell you, Manjeet, it's a great way of taking out whatever angst you got, both ways, all right?
You can be who you want to be, Mohan.
Stress reliever. It's a stress reliever, and you can argue with people, and you go to bed very relieved and say, happy, I had my days arguing. I will argue. If you don't like it, put it down.
Right. And
I want to make one point, Manjeet, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Look, for the entire population of a country is a stress reliever to take out your anger against your leaders openly and then tweet to them and take it out and feel good about it. So I think the social repercussions of that ability to communicate and take it out openly and tell them what you think of them, and also put forward your pleas, your needs, your requirement, and know that they're going to listen to you is unbelievable. It restores confidence in your country's leadership.
Yeah, and also because
Manjeet, I'd like to add one thing, Manjeet. I think we really need to teach our children social media etiquette and how to use these social tools. I think it should be really in every curriculum, how to use Twitter, how to use Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. You know, really that we educate our kids on how to behave wisely and how to use these tools. You know, I think this has to be the next step.
Well, Matthias, maybe you should be writing that book. But
if I can add to what everyone has been saying, I think what we're looking at is an information paradigm in which the power has finally moved from a select few to the masses. You now have the ability to communicate with the Prime Minister of India one-on-one. If you saw his birthday tweets, he responded to
everybody,
all users. Yeah. You can now communicate with the Mars orbiter in real time. Communication unheard of just a few years ago.
So on that happy note, communicating with your Prime Minister and with the Mars orbiter, social media, you're it.
Twitter, basically.
Twitter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it, Mohan and Matthias. And Rasil, thank you very much. And Navdeep, who's not here. And thank you very much, Social Media Week.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. A round of applause for our panel members on stage and online. Thank you so much.